hey guys, Happy New Year, Merry belated Christmas, Happy Yule, however you celebrated the season, unless it's one of the other ways, of course. Now, first of all, and don't take this the wrong way because this is mainly an attempt to remain on this platform, but I do feel like it's something that must be said. We can all agree that Trump lost this election, right? He lost it in all of the relevant ways. And if he hadn't lost it by the 6th or the 7th or the 8th, he's definitely lost it now. He didn't service his base. I went over that more in my last video. He didn't secure the election despite loudly voicing concerns about the security of the election leading up to it. He didn't take any concrete action to secure it to his satisfaction or to the satisfaction of many of his supporters. He didn't do anything about big tech. He hinted a little bit about it being a problem right at the very end of his campaign and that he might do something about it if he got reelected. But he didn't do anything about it in time, and so he didn't get reelected. And that's almost certainly a decisive reason why he didn't get reelected. I mean, you can believe whatever you want about the irregularities or the fraud, but without the big tech monkeying with things, swaying the election, censoring, suppressing, manipulating, boosting, all the little things they do algorithmically, he wouldn't have even been within the margin of cheat. It wouldn't have been possible to steal the election without the big tech advantage or the fake news advantage that the Democrats had, because they had the fake news entirely in their corner. Now, I'll give Trump some credit there. He actually has done more against the fake news than anybody else ever has, probably. And even if it wasn't like executive orders or legislative or anything like that, nothing institutional, just his commentary essentially and his baiting of the press into revealing their fundamental bias and ridiculousness combined with his retaliatory abuse has done more to pull the mask off of the fake news and their shenanigans than anybody ever has. So I'll give him some credit there. He did handle that in a way, in a more substantive way than anybody ever has, but it still probably wasn't enough, right? So, and of course, he gave his speech on the 6th that some people apparently mistook for him announcing that he was crossing the Rubicon or initiating some kind of bold action or calling for some kind of bold action, which, I didn't take it that way. I don't know how anybody could take it that way, but it looks like maybe some people did. And it was nothing new. It was the same old crap he's been whining about on Twitter forever since the election, since before the election. Like all his speeches, it was tremendously low resolution. There wasn't really anything new. There weren't any new revelations, but even what he did rehash that he said before, he didn't go into any depth. So, he didn't make his case about election fraud. He didn't make it in his speeches. He didn't make it in public. His team didn't make it, behind the scenes or in court or any of the ways that they maybe could have made it. Now, I know the courts, threw a lot of stuff out on technicalities and fell down on the job themselves. But Trump didn't make his case. So that's a big part of why he lost the election. And, of course, after the events at the Capitol building, he did throw those people and a good number of his supporters under the bus. He did concede. He has conceded multiple times. Now, some people split hairs and say he's never completely, formally, literally, unambiguously conceded, but he's conceded. He's conceded several times, and he was conceding on the 6th in his speech that some people are saying incited a riot. He was conceding because he was trying to set Pence up to take the blame so he could slink away and save face with another betrayal narrative. That's what he was doing in the speech. That's what I saw. That's what I recognized it for. And it's a shame that, anybody mistook that for anything but a veiled concession and did something stupid as a result. Now, a lot of that probably has to do with, believing in other stuff like the Q conspiracy theories about some kind of secret war against the deep state. That maybe they thought they were part of something bigger than themselves, or none of that stuff exists, and we'll talk about that more later. But that was a big part of it too. It wasn't just Trump, and nothing he said is legally speaking incitement, right? Now you could maybe argue that his speech was inflammatory or incendiary or irresponsible or whatever. So maybe in some indirect way, he's causally or morally responsible for inciting something. But to be guilty of incitement legally, it has to be explicit. It has to be explicit. It has to be an explicit call for violence or imminent lawless action, and that he did not do. So if his impeachment is fair, they will have to they'll have to dismiss those charges. Now, we all know it's not fair just for the simple fact that no Democrats are going to be impeached for inciting violence like they did all last summer. And the same with the censorship, the big tech crackdowns, deplatforming the president. They're not going to deplatform Kamala Harris. They're not going to deplatform BLM. We all know this stuff only goes one way, whether it's in government or in the big tech companies, the woke capitalist firms. We all know this stuff only goes one way. But yeah, no, Trump, no comeback in 2024. Like, his behavior, especially in the last week, has been just very unleader-like. So, I don't really want to see him back. If he does come back, I'm not voting for him. I hope you don't vote for him. I hope you don't encourage anybody to vote for him, because we don't need this again. And then one other thing, don't do anything stupid this week, especially not in Washington. They've got 25,000 National Guard in Washington already. And those guys aren't the enemies. Those guys are us, basically. They come from us. And, I heard one of the Democrat politicians was saying that all the guardsmen there should be asked if they sympathize with domestic terrorism, which I'm sure if they did that would piss off more than it wouldn't. Okay? So just don't do anything stupid in Washington, because there's nothing to be gained from that. The best thing to happen this week in Washington is nothing. And then the Democrats look stupid and heavy-handed and paranoid. And hopefully some of these guardsmen are seeing what's going on and questioning some of the things that they're hearing and, coming to similar conclusions themselves. So there's nothing to be gained by doing anything stupid up there. So just don't do that. And I'm not just saying that because the feds paid me a visit this week and told me not to do that, because I wasn't planning on doing that anyway, and I wasn't planning on asking you to do that anyway. But that did happen. And I'm hearing from a lot of other people, too, that they've gotten visits like that. So the big thing that's been going on since the 6th is censorship. Trump got deplatformed. Tens or hundreds of thousands of others have been deplatformed. Amazon and Google and Apple ganged up to try and shut down Parler. Now, I've heard it's coming back. So it's apparently not down for the count, but they have been successful in getting it shut down for a while. And, even the Twitter CEO, Jack Dorsey, admitted that this was a problem. He said he thought what his company did was best for Twitter, but he acknowledged that there are serious criticisms of not only the actions of his company, but the whole situation, especially when you take the actions of all these companies together. So this is a major issue that's going to have to be dealt with. And the result is going to be a rise in alt tech. And the only way that alt tech can be suppressed in the long run, they can do all these shenanigans with the app stores and the web hosting and everything. But eventually there are going to be workarounds. Eventually, this stuff is going to pop back up and take off, and there's going to be tens of millions of angry, disenfranchised people who can't speak their minds on the main platforms, and they're going to migrate to alt tech. And the only way to stop it meaningfully would be to have the government crack down. And that's going to take political capital, which the Democrats are actually sorely lacking right now. I don't see them having a lot of political capital. Just like the media, who's going all shrill and pearl clutching and, outrage and hysteria and all that. The Democrats are kind of playing into that, right? But their hysterics and their outrage are coming from a position of weakness. They're not coming from a position of strength. They don't fundamentally have a strong mandate. Like, a huge portion of the population doesn't even believe they legitimately won the election. On paper, their victory is resounding, picking up leads in the House, the Senate, the White House, etc. But they don't have the political capital. They don't have the mandate to really strongly push an agenda. And the stronger they try, the more pushback they're going to get. So, they're going to do some stuff. We know they're going to try to do gun control at least to an extent. They're going to try to do amnesty. They're going to try to bring in record numbers of refugees and immigrants. So all of that stuff is stuff we can anticipate. But the more they keep laying on top of that, the more pushback they're going to get. That's all I'm saying. They have a finite amount of political capital, and cracking down on alt tech to totally shut down free speech, our free speech, more than the woke capitalist platforms can do on their own, is going to take a lot of political capital. Political capital that I just don't see them having. Now, that doesn't mean they're not going to try, which brings us to the next point. What does all this mean? Is there going to be a civil war? Well, it's certainly possible. I think they would really have to bungle this to trigger that in a big way, in a systematic way. Probably there will be some individual craziness that goes on, in the coming days, weeks, months, years. There will be some individual acts of resistance. Whether it will trigger a general civil war depends entirely on, how reasonable they are, or how humble, how sensitive. Now, I'm not seeing a lot of that from them now. So it's entirely possible that they're just going to keep doubling down and being terrible and, being the opposite of all those good things. And they could push it to that point. I don't see why they would want to. I don't see why they wouldn't be able to anticipate that would be the result of their actions and rein it in. But I haven't seen them trying to avert it at this point. I don't think it'll get there. That's not the most likely outcome, in my opinion. Probably what we're looking at is 20 years of tyranny, at least, minimum. Because once the Democrats get in, they're going to do amnesty. They're going to give a bunch of illegal Democrats the vote. We're already seeing demographic changes that were baked in. Because the boomers are aging out, dying out, and the Zoomers are aging into majority and voting age. And Zoomers are much more progressive than boomers, statistically speaking. Now there's a divide. Zoomers are bifurcating. They're much more polarized than boomers, probably, but still more progressive on average. So, there's all sorts of people who have already been in process, with their green cards, waiting for citizenship, getting their citizenship, starting to vote. There's all sorts of, whether it's generational changes or naturalization. The demographic changes that have been in the pipeline are enough to keep the Democrats in power. And then you add amnesty onto that, and they're going to be the dominant national party for a long time unless something really dramatically changes. We know some of the things that could be, but we don't know how likely they are. So what's the way to survive all this and to come out on top? Local resistance, I think, is the way to go. We can still take back more than half of the states and a much higher percentage of locales because by area, the country predominantly belongs to us. The leftists and their client groups are all bunched up in the big blue cities, and they control a very small percentage of the geographical area in this country. So their ability to exercise power outside of those tiny but densely populated blue cities can be nullified or mitigated in a variety of ways. And I'll just give you one example, which is jury nullification. And the basic idea is if a law is unjust, a jury doesn't have to convict. Even if the facts say that someone is guilty of violating that law, if the law is unjust, the jury doesn't have to convict. And that's a thing a lot of jurors don't know or don't understand, or a lot of potential jurors don't know or don't understand. But educate yourself about jury nullification. The Fully Informed Jury Association has a lot of good material on it, FIJA.org. And you can read Lysander Spooner's essay on the trial by jury. It's more of a book than an essay, to be honest. And Lysander Spooner is a 19th century individualist anarchist. So, you got to take him with a grain of salt. But the correct way to read Spooner is when he's arguing for his political biases and conclusions, he's not so great. But when he's arguing against the mainstream predominant political narratives of his time, 19th century classical liberalism, which is substantially similar to conservatism, he's in top form. So I recommend Spooner's stuff about trial by jury especially. But just be aware that you do have to read it with a grain of salt. But it's good stuff. And of course, jury nullification, if it's hard to secure a conviction in certain cases where we believe an action is legitimate and maybe the government does not, that opens up a lot of other possibilities for resistance. So we can deny these bungers the ability to effectively exercise control or exercise authority, outside of their disgusting liberal leftist hive cities. And of course, you should be preparing for worse as well. I don't know how likely the worst case scenarios are, but you should be preparing for those as well. And it's still legal to prepare for those. But just be smart, know the lines, know what you're allowed to do, know what you're allowed to say and what you're not. And, don't cross those lines unless absolutely necessary. And one final thing, don't assume we have friends in high places, okay? Because we don't. We basically don't. And this is especially aimed at like the Q-tard segment. Because this Q thing, a lot of us have been saying it's probably a psyop or whatever for a long time. And I just came across something by Anatoly Golitsyn in a book called New Lies for Old. And this guy is a KGB defector from the 80s who wrote this book about KGB subversion tactics. And he's got a section in there about something called Operation Trust. Sound familiar? Trust the plan. Operation Trust was an operation that the Bolsheviks used to consolidate power in the Soviet Union by they created a fake anti-Soviet movement. And they sent representatives of this movement to the West to talk to emigres and powerful Westerners who were interested in helping the anti-Soviet movement. And they basically placated them by saying, no, we've got it under control. We've infiltrated the Soviet establishment, the Red Army, etc. We've got people in high places, and the Soviet Revolution is already starting to collapse. Okay? So this is literally, Q is literally a carbon copy of this. So whatever the Soviets did to consolidate power, the Bolsheviks did to consolidate power in the Soviet Union after their revolution, literally what is going on today with this Q nonsense. So you guys need to just cut it out with that shit. Because we don't have friends in high places. There is no plan. It is all up to us. We're it. The cavalry is not coming. Nobody's coming to save us. There's a lot of reasons for optimism, especially in the medium to long term, and even in the short term. I mean, you should be taking some white pills from January 6th because there was a big crowd there with a lot of energy and a lot of anger. And, seeing all that was incredibly energizing and invigorating and encouraging. So there's some white pills to take even in the short term. People are fed up. They're looking for solutions, real solutions. Not fake solutions, not placation, not, throw me a little bone. Real solutions, real change, dramatic change. People are ready for it, and they're ready to consider things they weren't willing to consider before. So I think it's going to be a local struggle. I think that's where we can do the most good. So get involved locally, network, make friends, prepare. We'll just see where all this goes. And I'll end with one final white pill, which is that, the demographics are trending in ways we don't like now. But that can turn around, and it will turn around. Because if you look at, let's say, the historical growth of the Amish, who double every 20 years, well, if that goes on for another 200 years, and granted there's always a danger in extrapolating past trends into the future, especially that far, but if that goes on for another 200 years, there'll be 300 million Amish in North America in 2200. and probably at least that many Mormons. So there are these subgroups of white conservative Americans who, they're demographically marginal now, but because they still have population growth, natural population growth, and then also in the case of the Mormons, conversion. But, they do have natural population growth. They have more than 3 children per woman, and the Amish have 6. Those groups are going to become demographically dominant. Eventually, they're going to dominate the demographics of white America. And their behavior is going to define the demographic trends in America, probably within decades, but certainly within a century or two. And whatever group you're in, whatever group I'm in, we can be demographically just as relevant if we do the right things as those groups. So I'm not just saying the country is going to go to them. I'm saying it's possible to do what they're doing and to become demographically relevant and to remain demographically relevant long into the future. And all the immigrants that the Democrats are bringing in, to impose their hostile and parasitic agendas, to serve as cheaper and cheaper replacement voters, to exploit and dominate and plunder the American people. Those immigrants are going into the demographic transition. The demographic transition is, the fall in fertility that occurred with urbanization and industrialization in Western countries. And they're going into that. But we have been in that for almost a century in the case of the U.S., maybe a little more than a century, 2 centuries in some European countries. We've been in that for many generations. And so we've already shed a lot of our antinatalists and a lot of, people who are susceptible to like antinatalist sentiments or arguments or anything of that sort. And so groups that are strongly pro-natalist subgroups are going to come to predominate our demographics. And they're already starting to come to predominate. It still hasn't become the dominant trend yet. We're still not out of the demographic transition, but we're going to be coming out of it. And these people who are coming here to replace us are going to be going into it. And so our demographics can bounce back. So there's a lot of reasons to be white-pilled, especially in the long term, especially in the medium term, and even in the short term, because the Democrats are going to fuck this up. They're already fucking this up. And there's a lot of people who are pissed off and are ready to not take it anymore. And so there's a lot of avenues we can work on. And there's a lot of levers we can work. And we just need to jump into it and do our best, and we can make a lot of progress. Talk to y'all later.